So.
Side turns on, it's good, and then you can just throw it off.
School, right? Like 9:30. All righty, everyone. Can you hear me out there? Okay, we're going to go on ahead and kick off our last Coffee with the Senator this morning. Appreciate all of you coming out and just engaging with Senator Lanuski. And also just want to thank Senator Lanuski for always taking time to do these Coffees with the Senator and also engage with his constituents. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Lance Atwater. I farm just south of Hastings here. I serve on the Nebraska Farm Bureau Board of Directors. I currently serve as second vice president, and also represent the South Central region in our organization. And then I'm also an Adams-Webster County Farm Bureau member. And I was actually just talking to Tom Hastings, we've been hosting it was originally just Adams County, but now it's Adams-Webster County Farm Bureau. We've been doing these coffees with the chamber for, I know at least I've been part of it for 12 years, and that's probably been even longer than that. So it's truly been a great partnership. And then I just, on behalf of Farm Bureau, want to thank Senator Lanuski for the work he's done in the legislature this session. I know a lot of times you don't get a lot of thanks because there is a lot of hard work that does go into it. I especially want to thank you for supporting the Ag Data Privacy Act that was introduced by Senator Jacobson, basically protecting the data for farmers that we collect in our machines, and also the livestock siting bill to help expand animal production here in the state of Nebraska when it comes to siting either feed yards, poultry barns, or hog barns. And then also, let's see, it was the brand bill too that really blew up. And many of you might not be familiar with the branding here in Nebraska, but as the Adams Kearney County line is actually where the brand law starts. If you go west of into Kearney County and out west, you have to brand livestock. Here in Adams County, we're not in the branding area. And so that ended up turning into a pretty hot topic, and just appreciate Senator Lanuski working on that issue. And I think we came to a resolution and trying to satisfy those that support it and those that maybe wanted to find a new avenue. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Shannon, and she'll lead our discussion this morning.
All right, good morning, everyone. We're going to start with Senator Lanuski providing us an overview of how session ended. This one, I'll say, was interesting, a lot of topical items, and of course, when it gets to fast and furious at the end, things can change pretty quickly. So we're going to facilitate that conversation around some identified questions we have related to our work. And then we're going to go ahead and open it up to audience. So we definitely want questions related to businesses and the items that relate to you at the state level. And so at that point, we'll ask you to just raise your hands, and we'll get to as many as we can. Senator Lanuski is wonderful about staying around afterward, too, to make sure there's a little more conversation time. Certainly, if you haven't, there is coffee and donuts. We've got some water over here for you, restrooms in the back. And I would ask if you can turn your cell phone to silent. And certainly if you need to take a call, we understand, but maybe step out to not disrupt our hour here. So I didn't say you, but you were concerning. All right, so let's go ahead, sir, and get started with just your overview and what you feel are maybe the highlights, things you're proud of. And I guess you're certainly welcome to note the lowlights if you choose, but I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, and thank you, Shannon, for doing this, and Lance, thank you. We're pretty fortunate to have both these people that are always willing to try and help spread the information of what's happening in Lincoln. I want to just highlight a few things and a couple of things that we've talked about here. We passed some budget and economic development bills, LB 803s for first-time home buyers. And it just allows them to have a savings account that's tax-free if they pull that money out of that account, then of course they'll be taxed. But if they're trying to buy their first home, then they get some sort of tax breaks, and hopefully it'll help spur our housing crisis with young people. LB 768's housing and finance expansion, and this is just some tools that will help middle-income families be able to afford their homes, and everything else as far as the economic development was in our budget, which we had to find $600 million and balance the budget, so we had to trim in a lot of different places. Housing and community development, we had LB 1114, Community Improvement District Act, and we do not qualify for that, but it's something that we're going to work on. I've been working and talking with Mayor Beckby about how could we get some of these grants and some of these things. And you have to qualify. You have to have an inland port. You have to have a rail station where they offload and upload the trains. And you have to have an airport for a certain size cargo plane. So there's some different things we're looking at to see if we can at least get partial grants there. We had LB 839. It got vetoed. It's missing middle housing updates, and Senator Roundtree brought this bill. He's from Omaha, and it's to make sure that there's enough affordable housing for disabled people. So it's a bill that might be needed in Omaha, but here the state already follows the federal guidelines, and so we're on line with that. In the end, that got vetoed, just as unfunded mandate. It probably doesn't apply to, 85% of the communities in Nebraska, and so that one didn't quite get through. I think Senator Roundtree is going to work on it for next year. Workforce and labor, LB 921, Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act. Think of Tyson, the Tyson plant in Lexington. Those people were notified in November that the plant was closing, I think, January 20th or sometime in January. So they didn't have a lot of notification. So we brought a bill that said you've got to give people longer notice than that when you're closing a plant of that size, and you have to do some retraining and try to help people out. And Tyson actually did kind of go back and say, rather than a hard close, we're going to try to keep as many people as we can, and they even still have a fraction of the people working there now that are still trying to close the plant down, if you will. So then we have LB 847, the Registered Apprentice Act. This is just trying to help young electricians, young plumbers, anybody that's in an apprenticeship, try to help them get started on their way, and if they stay in the state, they can get some incentives. This LB 878, paid parental leave for state employees. It seems like half of the state employees are getting maternity leave and half are not, and it looked like a real good bill. And at the very end, a senator attached an amendment saying we want 6 weeks paternity leave too, so the mom and the dad could get 6 weeks off, and that the governor vetoed that. He said for state employees that's just going to be too hard of a hit right now. And then his staff turned around and worked on something for the maternity outside of the legislature that pretty much, it was like the state patrol and some of the state employees like that, they didn't have this maternity leave, and they turned right around and without legislation said, we can include you in this. And so I think it worked out. Healthcare and Human Services, LB 1212, licensing doctors for shortages. We're really talking about doctors from out of the country. And as soon as Senator Reapy brought that bill, I happened to see some documentary on all these fake licensing places in India. And so they're just like going in there, paying a certain amount of money and getting a doctor's license and then practicing as they go. So he did put in some measures that will help set the guidelines for how much training they need and the proof of the training. And then on that, we added to one of my bills, we amended it in, which was Architects and Engineers Act. They're being tested with the same test twice in their last 2 years, and this simply makes it one test. And it's an expensive test, so now they just have to take it once, but it was pretty minor there. LB 958 Medicaid and home-based care expansion. We're trying to keep people from always using the hospital, and so if there's some way we can reimburse people when they're staying at home, and this included doulas, and doulas aren't real big in this part of the state. Out west, where they don't have hospitals for 70 miles or 100 miles, doulas are important. And basically, it's a extra person that knows about maternity care and helps a woman through her pregnancy, and can pretty much take care of a lot of stuff. They still need to go to a hospital, have that baby, but doulas are now going to be included in the Medicaid reimbursement. And then finally, LB 762, it's for pediatric autoimmune diseases. It's simply adding what's called PANDA, and it's a pediatric autoimmune system. It has to do with neurology, and it's basically kids that have anger issues that can't control them. And they say, well, this has something to do with something in our neurological system, and it will now be covered for medication or for doctors' visits and stuff. So it's a good bill. On to public safety and ag. So Lance talked about LB 525, agricultural data, privacy, and AI. And let me tell you my own personal story, because this just happened when my brother Jack spilled Pepsi into my Ford Ranger, into the starter. And the people at Kennesaw Ford can say, I said, hey, I got this little wrench that came on. And they said, it looks like something sticky got put into your ignition. When we looked at the data analysis on the computer, I said, you can tell what's going on with my pickup? Yep. I said, how do I know you guys didn't make that little wrench come on? And they said, well, we wouldn't do that. And Jeremy said, we wouldn't do that. But with ag, the cost of the tractor is just a fraction of what farmers now have to do. The AI and the computers and the land navigation system and everything else is all part of their, we want to protect their privacy so they're not, what we believe is happening is that information gets sold to a third party for advertising purposes or for other reasons. And I don't know if you want to touch on that anymore, but we came up with a bill that will help protect our farmers.
Yeah, and again, to thank Senator Laneski, it's basically so with agriculture nowadays, today, we're collecting a lot of data on our farms with yields and seeds, and I used to actually work in precision ag data at actually CPI, Cooperative Producers Inc. That's hard to believe it's been 12 or 13 years ago. But I always, back when I worked at CPI, I always told my clients that your data that you are collecting on your farms is just as valuable as your bank information, because it gives you so much insight into your farm operation. And if it gets put into the wrong hands or into foreign adversaries' hands, it could have a detriment on our family farmers and ranchers. So we really do appreciate Senator Laneski supporting that bill.
Thanks, Lance. LB 1096, foreign ownership and ag security. A year ago, we kind of put the brakes on some of the land being bought by people who are involved with the Chinese government. And this year, we've even done that more so that they can only lease space or ground for 5 years, and they have to get rechecked. And we no longer sell land, especially land that's near missile silos and military bases. So we've really put a curb on that. We're working on doing more there. And then LB 1010, energy and data center regulation. I don't know if you've been between Lincoln and Omaha lately, but Google is building, I don't know how many acres, 100 acres or whatever. It's just huge. You look and it's just all flat land, and there's all kinds of construction going on, and kind of says something about future site of Google. And so the big problem with us isn't that Google's going to build and support us. The big problem is the energy that it requires to run their plants. And they're going to require more energy than the entire city of Lincoln. And so, yeah, so they're going to maybe build their own energy source, or they're going to be quite regulated, or a combination of that. You know, and then there's a concern on how much water does it take to run all these centers. And right now, especially when we're somewhat in a drought, we just don't want some data center sucking our groundwater away. On the other hand, the AI could be, it's coming whether we want it to come or not. So we jump on this bandwagon and get some of these data centers. Does it help Nebraska's economy? Sure it will, but we got to make sure we take care of our energy sources and our water sources. In the criminal justice and social policy, LB 962, Youth Reentry and Transition Support Act, that's when these kids, they leave any of the juvenile detention centers, and we don't just want to turn them out and say, hey, you served your time, see ya, or you've improved to the rate of graduation, see ya, but we want to somehow keep them connected. And they are now, but we're just trying to strengthen that so that we kind of can help them through the next few years until maybe they get a good job and get things squared away a little bit. LB 1181 is a crime victims' rights. And so what we're trying to do there is, we've always taken care of the victims, or we've tried, but now we're extending that so that the family has rights. So that maybe, hey, I know that guy has a restriction that he can't go see my daughter anymore, but he's parked in front of my house. So what are my rights? Things like that. Or what are the other siblings' rights, or anything like that. So we're trying to strengthen that. Education and workforce, we had LB 937, prior learning, and K-12 cybersecurity. So prior learning was actually my bill. And if you took a advanced placement course in high school and got a certain score on it, and they score like up to 5. So if you got like a 4 or 5 on it, when you go to college, you wouldn't have to take that course. It's kind of like, hey, this kid's already smart enough. Why are we going to make him pay, a couple $1,000 more for a course that he has already aced? And so we've asked the colleges to all come up with the courses in their booklet, their curriculum book that says, hey, we count this class, advanced biology. We count this class, physiology 204 or whatever. And it'll just help kids save a little bit of money. And then the Cybersecurity Act, it doesn't get advertised a lot, but there have been some schools that have been hit pretty hard by cyber attacks, compromise the data of the parents or the kids, and it's going to cost us money, but we're right now studying. We've got to do something to protect them, at least at the ESU level, and then let those ESUs kind of look down and see what needs to be protected. Probably big takeaways, housing and workforce shortage. And when we talk about affordable housing, if you come to any meeting here in Lincoln at the city, we're always saying, well, what does affordable mean? It's a statewide crisis, and it's even a Midwest crisis where affordable housing isn't available. We're building these units and then charging $1,200 or $1,400 a month. That's not really affordable to a single parent with a kid or somebody that's working. So we're still working on that, and some housing finance and some things like that. Tax incentives and economic development. So one of the reasons we're in a big deficit right now is because we had tax incentives and tax credits a couple years ago, and we're still trying to make those come down. So income tax rates, the tax rates are lower for people. So we don't feel like we see it, but in fact, the income tax rates are less in our state, and property tax credits are less. So we've got that. And healthcare access, I've gotten a lot of emails from people saying, I'm being kicked off Medicaid. I'm 24-hour care for my child. I cannot afford to do this without Medicaid. So every time I go back to Health and Human Services, either to Dr. Corsi or to Senator Hardin, who's the chair, and they say they have to re-enroll. Tell them to re-enroll, they'll be right back on. What we found out is there's a lot of people that are double dipping, meaning they're in Wyoming or Colorado and Nebraska as Medicaid recipients. You know, they either move and don't tell anybody, or they purposefully scam the system. And then there's just a lot of people that shouldn't be on it, and they're taking away a lot of the funding from people that really do need it. So we're trying to hit the reboot there, if you would. Any emerging issues, it's just the AI stuff. The artificial intelligence is coming at us faster than we can take it in, I guess, is the best thing to say. It's, you know, we're looking at kids that can push a button in high school and it'll write them a 500-word essay. We're looking at newspapers and they'll say, they're supposed to say this story was assisted by AI. And from what I've seen, everybody's doing that. There's senators that write their speeches using AI. And so we're not going to stop it. We've got to figure out how to control it, I guess, is the best, so we're still using it to our advantage and not, you know, overtaken by something that we don't know about. We had 5 vetoes. 1256 was an emergency management bill. It was good. It was going to help, you know, use FEMA and NEMA to remove ice and snow. It could add $40 million to the property taxes. So we said, you know, now's not the time. Maybe it's a good bill. Now's not the time. 1029, I talked about foreign adversary bill. And that one, the bill said we're still going to check all our foreign adversaries, anybody from out of the country that works here, but we're not going to look at their wages. And so I said, well, so if Russia hired a guy and said, instead of all these gifts I'm giving you, I'll just pay you $500,000 because they're not going to question wages. So the governor said that could lead to so many different types of inappropriate use that he vetoed it, and the body said we agree. So that one got vetoed. Missing Middle Housing Act was the ADA requirements. We're on with federal. We just didn't make it more strict for state. 929 provides managed care organizations to pay deductibles for low-income people. Kind of redundancy. Already that happens. We just didn't want to put it in statute, and with the idea that if people don't have to pay the deductible, they're more likely to go to the doctors all the time and take advantage of it. And of course, when we need to go, we want to be able to go, but we don't want people to take that. And then the 878 was the required maternity leave for fathers, so paternity leave. So that's really a quick update, not as quick as I thought it would go, but any questions about any of those?
All right, we're going to just do a couple here that I think you did an excellent job and have touched on a lot of the questions that I may have asked on specific bills. So I want to talk a little bit today too about, you know, what's happening now, preparing for next session. You know, looking at the budget conversation, we talk about the budget shortfall, but we talk about the desire for property tax relief. And I know that seems pretty simple, but it's kind of a walking contradiction. But there's so much effort going into cuts, to sweeps, to program changes, all the things. In economic development, we really believe that you can't cut your way to a balanced budget. Bills are not going to go down, no matter how much we try to control that. So I guess I want to hear your perspective and how you're investing time and really growing the state, growing revenues, and you know what you're doing with your partners down in Lincoln, or I should say in Lincoln, not down there, but you know it's a big conversation. And again, in development, we believe in expanding the tax base and growing to get to that balance. So just want to get your thoughts on that.
Okay, I think there's two thoughts out there. Some people say let's just raise the sales tax 1 cent across the board, and that will bring in so much revenue, and 1 more cent per dollar, you know, isn't going to be a big deal. And then there's some people that say we've got to cut way back on spending. And when they say cut back on spending, they're talking about school, county, and city. because that's your three largest. Well, it's also your, three large employers, three things that are making the community go. So I guess from my perspective, there's got to be some sort of use of both. So like we had the cigarette tax. We had a group of senators that said, we are not raising taxes on anything. And they took a vow, and they were trying to get me in on it. And I went to Senator Clemens, who's been there for 10 years, and he said, sounds like a freshman mistake if you sign that. And I said, well, I just don't want to be cornered on something. And then when the cigarette tax came, we said, well, we can raise, we're the lowest in the Midwest or second lowest in the region on cigarette taxes. Let's raise that. That will bring in millions. But those people that had signed that stood their ground. They took their, they took their vow, and so I don't fault them for what they did. But that's one place where I was okay to raise the cigarette tax and vaping tax that we're together on it and try to, and there's people that argue, well, if it gets too expensive, they'll quit, then you won't have any tax. I was like, well, darn, that'd be bad if people quit because it got expensive. So we have that group that don't want to raise taxes on anything. Then we had Senator Brandt wanted to have 2% lid, a cap on county, on everything, 2%. He went around, asked, would you vote? And I said, I would vote for that if it were 2.5%, because as I did not look at counties and cities, but I looked at 5 or 6 schools, and they were all right around 2.5. Mm-hmm. Lincoln and Omaha were around 5 with their schools. So I thought, we probably could do 2.5 and make it a 5-year average. So like if one year you had to do 3, maybe the next year you could go down to 2. But that didn't get enough votes even at 2.5%. So then Senator Brandt didn't bring it to the floor. He just dropped it. And we were getting toward the end. Speaker Arch was getting antsy about what we had time to hear and not hear, and so we didn't get there. So for me, I think we've got to put some sort of cap on, but we certainly need the growth. I was just at Royal Plastics in Minden, and they are adding on, and they're going to add 50 employees to move up to 300. I've gone by Royal Plastics 100 times and didn't know that they were making the nose for fighter jets, and they have a contract with the United States government with the military, and the fact that there's going to be 300 employees working there is just like, wow, this just looks like a Quonset from the outside, but they're doing some pretty amazing things in there. So we need that kind of development, and not just in Hastings, but Minden and Holdridge and across the state. So I just think we got to keep trying things, and keep trying to grow.
No, I appreciate that. I think what I heard is that you agree with a balanced approach, and at the same time making educated decisions, not just go cut, but understand the what happens with that and even the unintended consequences. Senator Lineski and I have also talked in another conversation about the border communities and making sure that some of these cuts, but some of these additions in tax, aren't pushing people across the border. Sometimes we hope that it pulls people from Council Bluffs to Omaha, but the same can be true very, very quickly. We have had a lot of great discussions here, but in the respect for your time, I just want to ask one more thing pretty quickly that relates to growth and how we're measuring for Hastings, and I think it relates to you as well. So our annual report is coming out, and we're a lot of people, I think all of us would define growth differently, but at the end of the day, we look at data and we see that, incomes need to rise. We want population to grow. We want the valuation to grow. And also, there's lots of other data points that we can see. And I know that is a measure of the Department of Economic Development. They've made some headlines recently, but I mean, what are your measures? We can look at everything from early childhood to education, primary, secondary, workforce training. I think we're very fortunate. One note I'll make is that we had the UNL Department of Education come out here and meet with our manufacturers, and they have reintroduced one of their engineering programs. Their industrial engineering had gone away, but there's such a need, they brought it back. And so it's great to have that connection and voice, even like we have here today. But as we continue to invest in all of the early childhood and education programming, as an educator, how do you think we can best do that in partnership from our school districts to our universities to our state? What are some of your ideas?
More money. Yeah, so, and you touched on a lot of things there. So child care first. We had increased child care subsidies during COVID, and then there was a sunset this last year, and we voted to continue those. And it was contentious, and there was a lot of trying to amend it and make it better. You know, there's one senator that said, "I don't remember volunteering to pay for other kids' upbringing." So there's kind of that attitude, like, learn to take care of your kids, I guess, was his. And then there's some people that said, if we want women, and not just women, but more women stay home than men, if we want women in the workforce, we either got to pay them more in the workforce, or we got to help them with child subsidies, with child care subsidies. And so, so we ended up extending those, and so I think it's like 180% of poverty level that you could get subsidies. And as soon as we passed that bill, one of my daughter-in-laws texted me and said, "What does that mean?" I said, "You make too much, forget it." But we do want to help people out, and especially if it's a single parent. You know, they've got to be in the workforce to make it work, and so we have to keep child care low too. And gosh, that's tricky. What was the next?
Really just how we invest in our maybe 0 to 22 age demographic, and we've talked a ton about keeping them here. But what do you think some of those keys are, and how do I work on that with our local schools while you work on that too? What are the priorities there?
I think we have to do a better job of advertising ourselves. And so I think we need, like, somebody from Royal Plastics needs to come to Hastings High or Adams Central or St. Cecilia and say, "We want you kids to come on a tour on this day," because I've lived here 30 years and I knew they made plastic at Royal Plastics. That's about the extent of it. Now the fact that they've got, they've got all these dialysis machines and all these other, they're taking these minute x-rays of the fuselage that they've made to ensure that there's not one little extra sand of grain somehow that got accidentally embedded so that it flies. And they've got, and Royal Plastics has a lot of robotics, but they still need people to run them. So, so we need, those kinds of people to come into our schools and even our community colleges and colleges and say, you know what, if you don't want to continue on to medical school, which is another 8 years of your life, we make a pretty decent wage here at Royal Plastic, and they're employee owned. So every one of those people that works there is invested there as well. So,
right. You know Shamu, right? Shamu, the whale.
Yeah.
Did you know the roof over him is made here in Hastings?
No.
Fun fact. All right, let's get to the audience questions. Again, I could do this all day. It's about 9:40. Does anybody have anything you'd like to ask? Yeah, I'm going to get you the microphone so he's able to hear.
Hi, this has to do with LB 867. It passed 49-0. I was real concerned about it at the beginning because it was going to move around our incarcerated youth and our teachers that teach those incarcerated youth, which means if the teachers have to move around, their families have to move around. And so my concern is it got removed from 867 and 867 past 490, but what are your thoughts? Because it's probably going to come around again. As a teacher, stability is so key for the students. Stability is key for the teachers. Stability is key for those teachers' families. And the more education we can get our incarcerated youth, maybe they would go on to, a technical school and get a trade or go on to something that interested them. So your thoughts on that?
Okay, thank you, Elaine. So it's kind of similar to our regional centers that we used to have. Those were valuable assets to communities. And now these youth are getting incarcerated. We want to have them so they have a center somewhere near their family. With that being said, the almighty dollar kind of drives what happens, and as our population base moves toward Lincoln and Omaha, it seems like a lot more of those centers move that way. And I'll give you an example. Western Alternative Corrections, is it WAC? So they just recently closed their doors on their inpatient because there's no accountability. So a guy comes in there drunk that they want to give him a bed for the night, but then the guy does drugs inside there, they kick him out. Well, the police have nowhere to take them. The state doesn't have a fallback plan as far as moving them to Lincoln to be incarcerated. And so they've just given up on that part of it. With the liability and the insurance costs and everything else, they can't afford to do that part of their business. And it pains me to even think that we keep moving more and more of these facilities to Omaha and Lincoln. And if they need them, we still need them out here. Of course, some of the things that happened in Kearney have come to light, and so now that youth facility has a black eye, and they're trying to work around everything. But we want to keep those places in our communities as much as possible because we have a need for them as much as the big cities. And I don't know if I'm answering your question, but hopefully we can work on ways to keep them in our communities.
Okay, what else? Got some more questions? Yes, here you go.
Yeah, Dan, if you remember, I was pretty deep into the EPIC option. On the revenue side, and I'm going to go back to the Beacon Hill report from 23, just because that's all in my head right now. At that time, sales tax, we had $50 billion in sales in Nebraska that was subject to the sales tax, had $70 billion that was exempt. Can we look into the exemptions? And I'm thinking maybe 1-2%, and I know that's going to create problems, but you can't throw it all out or pick and choose. It'd have to be kind of a blanket thing. Would that be something you'd look at?
For sure. And that's one of the things I talk with Attorney General Hilders about is we have so many exemptions. If we could put that list down and say, let's cut them in half, or, this group needs to not be exempt. I don't think I'm the expert to go through that list, but I certainly agree with the problem that you're talking about. Sure, yeah. Yeah. And some of them we can't, because it's I think the nonprofits, I think that fall under a federal statute, and so we're not allowed to do a whole lot there, but no, I think it's a great idea. I really do.
All right, what else? Here we go.
I grew up in the Brand area, and I'd like to know more. Where did they end up with the brands in Nebraska? Because you couldn't keep track of it because of the amendments and another brought, you just lose track. So what did they end up doing when it come to the brands?
I'll let Lance answer that. I will tell you that it's really brand inspection that we're talking about. So in the West, every time ranchers moved their cattle, they were having to go through brand inspection, pay for the move, even if they're moving from their own pasture land to their own pasture land 3 miles down the road. And so in the eastern half of the state was exempt because each county decided on their own way back when. But we came to an agreement at the end. I'm going to let Lance answer that. It's probably a little better.
Yeah, so like Senator Lenuski said, it was on the brand inspection fee or inspection. So it was never really doing away with the brand, but ultimately dismantling brand inspection would, for those out west, felt like that would basically dismantle branding. So what they did is they kept it intact, and they've upped the fees, I think, to $1.50, if I remember right. Now that's basically the cap, so the brand committee can raise the fee up to $1.50. They lowered for the registered feed yards. That got lowered down to, I think, 20% of whatever that fee is. So if it's $1.50, take that times 20%. That's what the registered feed yard would pay, a one-time fee. So if it's a 10,000 head feed yard, they would take that 20, let's say it's 20 cents or whatever, times that 10,000. That's what they'd pay every year to help maintain the brand committee. And then they expanded the brand committee to 7 members now. So it includes, I think, a sale barn owner somewhere in the brand inspection area. They have 5 districts now, and one of those districts is also the brand area that is east, would be the non-brand inspection area. So like Adams County here would fall under that would fall in that district where we don't have brand inspection required. And then I believe a registered feedlot owner in the brand inspection area is also on that board. So it used to just be 5 board members, now it's up to 7, I believe. I think they wanted to go to 9, but it's to 7, and now they have districts, and it's based off of cattle numbers in those districts. So, basically, I think everyone feels like we've come to a compromise, and a shout out to Senator Jacobson. He was the one that kind of took the lead in getting a compromise there to keep, I think, everyone happy in the brand inspection area, but also address the concerns of the registered feedlots. Those were the ones that were concerned about the expense that they were having to bear.
Yeah, and so just to add to that a little bit, the people that have the feedlots, they don't feel like they need to go through brand inspection because they don't feel like their cattle are being stolen or rustled as much, whereas the ranchers still wanted that inspection committee to remain in place because they feel like, hey, when cattle do, even a lot of times cattle just somehow get into somebody else's pasture, and they don't even know it till they get to a sale barn or until they get somewhere and they're like, hey, that's not our brand. And so the inspection committee, kind of double checks the paperwork, looks for diseases. But the feedlot people are just like, our cattle are well contained. They don't get out. So that's kind of the.
And I'd just add, where it all kind of started was that Senator Hansen wanted to make it voluntary brand inspection statewide. And Farm Bureau policy, we want it mandatory statewide. And so that's really what got everyone up in arms, is if you get out in the Sandhills, for those of you that aren't familiar with cattle, the Sandhills is a very big area, and it's very easy for your calves or cows to get into someone else's pasture and not know it. And the ranchers' fears were, if that happened, how are we going to catch that? Because we're at all-time record highs for cattle prices right now. And that, when you look at an animal that could be $3,000, that's a lot of money that goes into a rancher's pocket. And so how do we identify or catch those, or if someone is purposely stealing cattle, how are we going to catch that if we move to a voluntary brand inspection? So that's really why that blew up this year, because it's not only a tradition out west, but it also serves a purpose.
Yeah.
Thank you. I have a question, sir, and this is kind of a project of my heart, and I assume yours. LB 805, as we look across the street at our friend Rakesh, and a sidebar, Innovative Prosthetics and Orthotics, just right over here, actually has a contract with NASA. So we're trying to figure out if we had some Hastings parts go into the Artemis 2 project. Waiting on that answer, but how did that bill turn out with cranial helmets? I mean,
So-
unrelated to that, but wanted to check on that. We haven't talked
So
recently.
I brought a bill that insurance companies would have to cover the cranial helmets for babies when they're born with an indent or a flat side on their head or something. And it's not a large number, and that helmet is from 2 months to a year, and after that, their skull is hard enough that whatever is formed is formed. Some insurance companies elect not to cover that. They call it cosmetic and so Dr. Rakesh had brought that to me. It looked good, it sounded good. One person on the insurance and banking committee did not like it. He happened to be the chair, so he did not have it in front of the committee, and they never decided on it. I will bring it back next year. I'll call it something else or improve it a little bit if I can. And I just think it's not a difficult bill. It's not, the reason he didn't want to hear it is he said it's an unfunded mandate for insurance companies and create everyone's premiums to rise. And so that's kind of true with everything. Once upon a time, certain cancers weren't covered by insurance, and we had to go to a legislature and say, that should be covered, or
Right.
things like that. So that's where that is.
Okay, I appreciated that it was probably one of the bills with the least amount of words the whole session. Nice readable page and a half. That was great. All right, any other questions in the audience? No?
I got
Lance?
one here, just to kind of go back as we go into the interim between next session now, and it was kind of touched on with property taxes a little bit as we talk about economic development. I mean, we need to grow our economy, but in order to do that, as we talk about affordable housing crisis for young people, I mean, as property taxes continue to go up, it makes it really hard for even young people to just, not only do you have to make a mortgage payment, but you got to pay those taxes. I know, for example, with my farm I own, my taxes went up, I think, 5-6%, but then the price I received for my corn this last year went down 10%. So there's, my expenses go up, but revenue's going down. And the ag economy's really struggling right now. Where do you see, in between now and next session, we're going to somewhere make headway? Because we didn't do anything on property taxes this year, and that plays into growing economies. Funding our schools, funding roads and all that, but you have to have a balance there.
I honestly think it's going to be difficult this next session. This is the third year or the final year of the income tax cuts and the property tax incentives. And so we're going to be at a shortfall again. So it's going to be hard to do something. And there's some good proposals out there. Whether or not they can gain 30 votes or not is the question. But obviously we got to do something. And there's one of my proposals is once you've lived in your house for 20 years and you reach age 65, if you've paid that off, you should be done paying property taxes. Because really, your property taxes, it's not increasing the value for you at all until you sell that home. So you're paying every year, but but you didn't benefit anything. And so there would have to be a lot of parameters to keep the millionaires and billionaires from coming in, paying it off, and saying, "Oh, I don't have to pay property taxes in Nebraska. I could just hold that property." So, and then we'd have to make sure there aren't exceptions, because there's some different ways we can work things, but it seems like we're taxing our youngest and our oldest out of their homes. So,
Thank you. I'll just end with asking if your committee assignments would change, or do you expect to have all the same committee assignments going into next session
The committee assignments will change a lot.
for you?
I don't think mine will. I think
Okay.
I will stay on Education Committee, and I will stay on the Government, Military, and Veterans Affairs Committee. So,
Good. All right. I would like to thank everyone for coming. If you see Matt Kerr